everything changes. There are things in, I was talking to Helen Fielding about Bridget Jones the other day, and there are things in that film that would not go down well. And certainly in Love Actually, there are things that I would now change, and the kind of lack of diversity in the casting of my movies. So, literally the world changes and people's attitude to the things that they see change.
Richard Curtis, welcome to Times Radio. The film highlights that 300 billion of UK pension money is invested in companies linked to deforestation. So no laughing matter, really. And yet the film approaches it in a rather comic way, with an unsuspecting couple opening the door to a delivery of a deforester 5000 and several large chainsaws. So you continue to think that spreading the message through comedy is the best way, having set up Comic Relief, of course, all those years ago and everything. Why do you think comedy is the best conduit?
Well, I would say in a funny way, comedy or clarity. I think that people's initial instincts is that there's something a bit scary about their pensions, or something a bit sort of stolid and overcomplicated. And there is a very simple fact here, which is that if your pension supports deforestation, so do you. It really is as simple as that. There are a million things. How do you change your pension? And are you going to make more or less money, and how do pensions affect businesses and everything like that? But the basic fact is, if we become aware that we can make our money matter, that our pensions could be something we're proud of, not a kind of dirty secret in what they do. So I'm just trying to make that very simple point, that it's a shock to many of us that we could be supporting deforestation, cigarettes, fossil fuels, all that kind of stuff.
What was your Damascene moment? Because an awful lot of people, if you do pay pensions, it's because you've got a work scheme and it sort of forces you to. And it's not really something people tend to think about until they're approaching retirement age, and they suddenly look in the pot and think, oh, not really enough in there. So what I mean by that is just that, it's not something that we generally take much interest in, or have much of a vested interest in, until perhaps some might say it's too late.
Well, look, oddly enough, in my moment was actually a TED talk. I happened to come upon a TED talk by someone called Dr. Bronwyn King, Australian cancer doctor. And she had her first meeting with her financial advisor when she was like 34, and said, "Where's my money?" And she found out that 3 of the top things she was invested in were cigarette companies. So that actually she was probably killing more people each day than she was saving by working every hour of her life on this issue. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, my money's at work. I think most of us think, our pension's just sitting there and magically, like in Gringotts Bank. But it's not. It's being invested all the time. And there's a choice as to what kind of things it can be invested in. And then you look at the figures and they're so startling. The UK pension fund is 3.1 trillion. Marielle, I've given my life to raising 1.5 billion for Comic Relief. And yet here's this massive amount of money which could be invested in all the good businesses that are trying to do the right thing with climate and gender and diversity and, supply chains. And actually that money of mine could be working every day for the things I believe in.
It's interesting because when you talk about pensions, I wonder if the people that need to be targeted the most aren't financial advisors. Because just in my own experience, having sort of said, well, I don't really want to be attached to anything, dodgy or cigarette-like or planet-destroying, in the last couple of years, they sort of go, well, if you want to go that route, you probably won't make as much money, and you won't, have as much to retire on, and you won't. And there is this sense, which actually I think is probably quite erroneous now, that that those new industries, as it were, new energy, all of those things aren't the way that are a risky business. When actually, if you think about the way society is changing and our attitudes are changing and our ethos is changing, a lot of those companies that they're sort of frowning at would seem to be much more sensible routes for investment.
Well, absolutely right. By the way, financial advisors, yes. And I've been on a great journey with my financial advisor, who started not knowing anything about it and is now kind of a respected expert. So it's all of us moving. I thought this was going to be an adversarial thing. where we'd say you know, wicked pension schemes, us, you know, passionate campaigners. But it turned out they're really thinking about it. They're changing their systems. And as you say, if you look at something like renewable energy, you know, maybe 15 years ago, it was a risky business. Now it's absolutely central to the development of all our energy needs. So yeah, financial advice is hugely important. I mean, there is a big thing here, which is young people, by the way, because when you join a firm, you have to take out a pension. You know, that's actually the law in the UK. And at that very moment, you have the ability to say, our scheme, the thing that the company is allowing us to do, has got to be carbon, aiming for carbon neutral, against deforestation, everything like that. But, you know, it is an interesting moment where it used to be, as it were, my dad told me when I was 25, get yourself a pension. And now it's the 25-year-olds telling their dads and mums, have you checked your pension? You know, are you sure that you're not actually completely contradicting all the things that we, you know, discuss and are committed to?
So what are the things, if we delved into, those of us who have pensions, if we delved into our pension pot, what are the things that you think we'd be most horrified by?
Well, I mean, we are looking at deforestation's my focus, as it were, this month, which is why we've made that film. You know, if investment in deforestation will be the third biggest damager to the battle against carbon in the world after the USA and China. So, you know, deforestation is a huge one. But there are other things, you know, like particularly like fossil fuels, like cigarettes, like pornography, like gambling, all these things which we would, you know, want to be curbed. Your money, you know, while you sleep at night, your money's sneaking out from under the duvet and hanging out with the people who are doing the wrong things. Whereas it could be improving the world, you know, investing in green cement and renewable energy and affordable housing and affordable healthcare. And so it's like it's not just a negative thing, it's a hugely positive thing.
A lot of those things you mentioned, though, don't come flagged up as what they are. I mean, obviously, if you see Philip Morris on your pension investments, you'll know that you're sticking money into the cigarette business. But, you know, deforestation is a very general thing, and it happens in many, many, many different ways. So how do people identify if they are putting money into industries that are creating more deforestation?
Well, you know, this is where it's an interesting partnership, Mariella, because I don't expect people, and it's quite hard, even though it's becoming easier, to kind of, as it were, look down and understand the list of things that they're invested in. But your pension fund really does. You know, and therefore, if your pension fund, which is what we're asking for, is committed to getting deforestation out of its portfolio by 2025, they're going to really be rigorous about it. They'll do that job. They'll be the ones that are, and also they're actually really good with arguing with companies about their policies. So they actually go to AGMs and say, there is no need for you to do this. So why don't you change your methods in order to make sure that you don't support deforestation companies, or that if you are a company that's doing that, you change your ways. Otherwise, we're going to remove the money that we're investing in you. So it's one of those things where it's like a partnership between us putting on pressure, asking for things to be changed, just making a choice to go for a sustainable pension, and then the pension companies making those commitments and campaigning themselves. You know, and then, you know, either government also demanding that the pension funds take into consideration, as it were, the stakeholders of the world rather than just the shareholders.
Is it more difficult at the moment? It may have escaped your notice, as I know you've been in California, in Los Angeles, for the last almost year. But we are going through an extremely difficult financial period here in the UK. Cost of living crisis revealed today that, you know, 4 in 10 families are not putting as much food on their tables as they were before, and can't afford food. And so, you know, none of those things that you'll be unaware of, because Comic Relief and charity projects, you know, the company that supports it, have obviously put an awful lot of money back into the UK in terms of people living in deprivation. But isn't it a difficult time to be talking to people about their pensions? Because anything that means they're going to end up with less is a
Right.
worry.
Now, this is the
And
absolutely key point, that is no longer the case. Yeah, I wouldn't have started this campaign, which has been going for about 3 years, Make My Money Matter. I spoke to so many people, as it were, almost on the wrong side of the line, very determined capitalists, and said, where does it stand now? And about 4 years ago, there was a big statement by the head of BlackRock, I think, saying the why not moment has arrived. In other words, we are no longer able to say that, as it were, the sustainable thing is high risk and are going to make you less. And in fact, in the last few years, these investments have made more in many cases. So it is not a choice. It's not morals versus money and value versus values. And I think it'd be hard to base a really big popular campaign on that, because people absolutely have to take care of their own finances. But in this case, one, you take care of your own finances, the rewards will be as good. And when you inherit your pension, it won't be in a world that's, on fire.
I guess I'm wondering, like, from an individual point of view, I want to change. How do I go about that change? Because, if I go to a financial advisor and I say to them, look, I want my pension to be sustainable, I want to be investing only in things that I believe in. Will that pension advisor and do those big pension companies know which are the new industries that are doing well, which are the companies that your pension should be invested in, which are the share areas, all of those things? I guess that's what frightens people.
Yeah, no, and it's quite right that it should frighten people. And that's why this campaign is kind of progressive, because it's going to become easier. There's a really successful pension fund in Australia called My Future Super, because they're called superannuations there. That is the basis of their business. You know that when you join them, they're sustainable. And it's going to become clearer and clearer. And by the way, some pension companies are stolid and haven't made the changes. And there may be people who make this inquiry and they say, no, we've literally got nothing. And then you've got to decide whether you go through the complex thing of changing. But a lot of companies are now saying you can have this kind of pension or that kind of pension, and you can make your choice at the beginning. I actually shifted my pension company. And by the way, I've never had better returns on my pension than I have this year. So it's not that you will find them hiding from you. They will actually be able to help you in changing.
You're listening to Mariella Frostrup on Times Radio. My guest is the philanthropist and filmmaker and screenwriter, Richard Curtis. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to Times Radio, and my guest is Richard Curtis. Richard, this is clearly, in terms of Make My Money Matter, this is clearly a sort of proactive way that people can approach the sense of just not being able individually to change anything, and this sense of sort of pervading doom that I think a lot of people are carrying on their shoulders at the moment. And we've seen the climate crisis, appear incredibly scarily in lots of different forms of culture, apocalyptic TV series and films like Don't Look Up. And do you think that those apocalyptic warnings are helpful, or do you think that, handing people an instrument with which they can make progress individually is much more important?
Well, look, we don't need the apocalyptic fiction, because we've been living through, so many fires and climate changes and changes of temperature and floods and everything like that. Honestly, the world is proving its own point now. Not that there's anything wrong with making those films and highlighting it. I just think that it's really important not to be demoralized by those observations, because there are so many things that people can do, in terms of changing your energy provider, giving up as much flying as you did, going vegan, having a meatless Monday and everything. The reason I'm obsessed by pensions is we did a bit of research which said that, in fact, changing your pension is 21 times more powerful than giving up flying, changing energy provider, and giving up eating meat. In fact, that it is the biggest single thing that you can do. I think that there's a massive argument that people should do all those other things. But this is one decisive act. And, the nature of capitalism has been to exploit the planet. And that has to radically change. And we have to help fund that radical change.
But doesn't the whole system have to change, the whole financial system of which we all remain a part? I mean, in a way, it's capitalism that's failed, isn't it? Because if you live in a system that constantly relies on increased growth, it makes me feel stressed even saying it. I start having palpitations.
I agree, but I remember going to a meeting in the Guildhall like 2.5 years ago, and some very serious men in suits saying that sustainability is the greatest investment opportunity since the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was, as it were, the massive change in our society, in the direction that we have now arrived. And sustainable investment, which we can all be part of, is the recalibration. But then when you talk about those huge things, you think, oh God, but I can't have anything to do with it. But you really can, because the amount of money in pension pots around the world is 47 trillion. And that money is made up of individuals like you and me. And it's just like voting. If you don't vote, you can't change the government, as it were. And if you don't vote with your pension, you can't do all the great things that we would, want people to do. And also, it's like quite a relaxing thing to do. If you give up eating meat, you have to not eat meat, deliberately for the next 10, 20 years. But if you really just put a bit of effort into changing your pension now, and contacting your pension provider and saying, don't invest in companies that are tearing down the Amazon, you can sit on your laurels for the next 30 years.
That's not what you want to encourage people to do, I'm sure, because the other thing about you is that once you've campaigned on one thing and you think you maybe, you've talked about the 1.5 billion or whatever raised by Comic Relief, but then next thing, there's another, there's the sustainable goals, there's the make my money matter, there's what is it that continues to drive you, and why is it that for a person who is so incredibly, political with a small p, I guess, but driven by such a desire to change the world, your own films aren't political films? Do you think it's very important to keep those two things separate?
Well, actually, I did make a couple of political films. I made a film called The Girl in the Cafe, which was about a romance at a G8 negotiation. Look, I have various different skills. Oddly enough, you asked what keeps me going here. And in lockdown, I spent a lot of time with my pretty adult kids. And whereas, when I was young, I can't imagine we would have talked about the Beatles and going to London. We really did talk a lot about race, gender, and climate. It's in the DNA of a new generation. And in fact, I'm just following my kids' lead in the new things that I'm focusing on. I never used to worry about climate change, but I worry about it a lot now because they're, as it were, on the streets marching about it. The world changes, and as it changes, Marielle, I think what happens is new opportunities for doing the right thing come up. As it were, actually on pensions 20 years ago, you would have taken a hit if you'd said, I want a sustainable pension. Now you actually stand to make a profit. So when new opportunities arise, that's, inspires someone like me to say, well, let's leap on this possibility.
New opportunities arrive, old ones close down as well. Interestingly, I was talking to David Williams yesterday, and one of the things we talked about was his raising that astonishing, I think, £1 million, wasn't it, for swimming the channel. And he was sort of talking about the fact that now there's a lot of controversy about that sort of white savior roles, and perhaps it would be not encouraged, but that ultimately he raised £1 million, and that is an extraordinary amount of money that can be put to incredible good use. As you'll know, that there was a big sort of pushback against the sort of films that obviously Comic Relief have made for for decades, sending people like the likes of me and others out to Africa to kind of report back on what they were seeing there. How do you feel about the way that's changed? Because no one would want to turn down the £1 million that David Walliams raised. And it seems in a way perfectly justifiable, dare I say.
Well, no, I mean, I've always thought, and by the way, everything changes. There are things in, I was talking to Helen Fielding about Bridget Jones the other day, and there are things in that film that would not go down well. And certainly in Love Actually, there are things that I would now change, and the kind of lack of diversity in the casting of my movies. So, literally the world changes and people's attitude to the things that they see change. And Comic Relief now just has to find really interesting new ways of convincing and talking to people about the need without reinforcing stereotypes that for some reason or other Africa, which is in many cases a hugely thriving nation. The danger is that you, as it were, every time you portray it on a hugely popular show like Comic Relief, you're saying everything's bad, and that's not true. So, it's a shift in the way people see things, and it's an opportunity to tell new stories like this pension story that we're telling, as it were. I don't feel at all offended by people saying that what one does in the past would no longer be right. That's right. That's why society and culture changes.
So have you, as a film director and writer, had to change, I don't know, the subject matter of your films, that the people you focus on in them? And is that a sensible way forward?
Well, yeah, because my mind has changed, as it were. So I would no longer say, that it's funny to, there are a lot of jokes about, weight in Notting Hill. People are teasing Martine for being overweight, which she's not, as it were. I definitely wouldn't do that now because I don't think that's funny any longer. So your idea of things changed. And I would have thought, talking about climate as we are now, I would have thought, oh my God, I'm really sort of in sandals and an extremist and the kind of person who eats lentils. Well, one, I eat lentils now. And two, all of us have really got to worry about the climate. Things change and your behavior changes and your ways of communicating things change.
Does it make it harder to be funny?
I think what makes it harder to be funny is me getting a bit older. I have noticed that when I start writing, I now start from an emotional perspective. I think, how's this person's life? Whereas I used to say is, how is this person funny? So I think that is a shift. So I'm relying on the 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds to make me laugh rather than relying on me and Ben Elton to do it.
So what are you going to write? Big emotive life stories, rites of passage for people in their 70s? I don't think so.
Who knows? I might write Nomadland too. But oddly enough, I think my writing might diminish because I'm not entertaining my kids as much as I used to. Whereas my campaigning is going to increase because I worry more and more about the world that they're living in, and I notice their passion is greater. And what I think always what we're trying to say is, don't feel powerless when you read all the things on the news, to do with climate, to do with injustice, to do with poverty. There's something you can do in your neighborhood. There's something you can do with charities you believe in. There's something you can do with your money. Every single day we can go about trying to do the right thing without it hurting us.
I've mentioned that you've been in Los Angeles for the last year or so. I think you're coming back soon. I wondered what that experience has been like and what it's taught you. You spent part, at least, of your film writing career poking fun at the sort of differences between Americans and Brits, in terms of the fact that we think we're very similar because we speak sort of the same language. But this is a deep immersion, even for a man fascinated with America like you.
Well, look, I mean, it's not really my business to say how it's been, apart from the fact that, I always have said, don't generalize about Americans, and we all know, I mean, we spend our whole life saying this is an English person I like or a Scottish person I don't like. And, Americans come in all shapes, sizes, passions. And I'm just reminded of that there's not a glib generalization about America. Very delighted as I drive down the streets here that I saw a thing that they're campaigning about banks, by the way, over here. And it says, if your bank is investing in cigarettes, so are you. So, what you always notice is the similarities and then, the dissimilarities. I've spent my entire time here just eating avocados, it seems.
Yes, oversized avocados that taste much less of avocado than the smaller, uglier variety. I'm sure there's a lesson in there.
At least the salt still tastes of salt, which is the thing you put on in order to make them taste.
So dare I ask what it is that you're doing there, aside from facilitating your son's rap career, as we saw when Spike went viral on stage at Coachella with Dave, my absolute obsession.
Well, yeah, I mean, oddly enough, I've been doing Red Nose Day over here. We had Red Nose Day in the UK, and Red Nose Day is on May the 26th. And that's very satisfying. I think we've reached $30 million or something already. So I'm doing that job. Mainly we came here because a lot of my kids were here and I wanted to be with them. And in fact, it's a strange thing in my life. I've been through the last day of the last term of the last child at school. So suddenly, Mariella, I'm free to be an even more passionate activist than I've been before.
God help us all. So just tell me then, finally, what are the biggest lifestyle changes that you've made? I'm not counting going to America for a year among them, but, you're clearly increasingly passionate about the damage that we're doing the planet, as inspired by your children, perhaps partly, but not necessarily fully. So what are the changes you've made? Because one of the things, I suppose, that, people do push back against is the idea of privileged people like you and I telling them what to do when lots and lots of us don't walk the walk. We just talk the talk.
I mean, that's so, true and fair. I would just say that, as humans on the planet, we can all see the direction of travel. And none of us will behave perfectly, but all of us can do something. And, on this particular campaign, I wouldn't have started this campaign if I hadn't changed my pension and actually changed my bank as well, because banks, it's the same story. Your money can be, doing the wrong things while, as it were, it's sitting there in the vault. I mean, it's a luxury to be able to fly, but a luxury I choose to do less. I've got a feeling if I'd come here before, I would have been backwards and forwards to the UK, whereas I just came back for Red Nose Day, and I'm looking at all the packaging and recycling things. But the point is, these things aren't token, because, as it were, if you stop buying something that is packaged in an unsustainable way, and millions of people do it, that business is not going to thrive, and they're going to start repackaging in a different way. So, I would say I'm very aware of how tough life is for many people, but life for all of us is going to be much tougher in 15 years' time if we don't crack climate, and there are specific things that we can do about it right now.
And if people have been inspired by you talking today, and why on earth wouldn't they be? Me particularly, how do I go and change my pension entirely and make sure that it's not going to the wrong places? I mean, are there particular companies now that are specializing in that area, for example?
Well, I mean, many of the pension companies have. We, as it were, if there's 3 trillion in, 1 trillion have now committed to the net zero commitment. So I think the first thing you start with, if you have a financial advisor, great, let them do it. But most of us don't. Most of us work for a company, go to the company, ask where the pension is, gather a few people around. That's the point of a financial officer at a company. He knows where the money is. and he can change it. And if he feels that everyone on the staff wants it changed, or even a small proportion do, they can. And then, the old thing of writing to your pension and asking where your money is and saying, have you got a sustainable thing and can I shift to it? All of these things in life are scary, but all of them now, there are systems and pathways to change.
It would be quite good if there was a sort of list that people could easily scan and see who's doing well and who isn't.
And, that is going to become more and more clear. I mean, that is not a service that Make My Money Matter offers, but if you go to our website, there is a lot of advice on stuff that you can do. And I think what's going to happen, which is going to be great, is the pension schemes are going to start advertising it. They're going to start boasting about it. You're going to become clear. It'll be a thing that actually makes consumers like us make choices.
So look at that beautiful balance between pessimism and optimism. Perfectly balanced there in your last two answers. Richard Curtis, thank you very much indeed. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And that was Richard Curtis. You can find more information at makemymoneymatter.co.uk.